My dear, there is something the world rarely talks about: the quiet work women do behind the scenes of a man's success. You see, when people look at a successful man, they often imagine he climbed the mountain alone. They admire his determination, his ambition, his discipline. What they rarely see is the person who held the ladder steady while he climbed. I know this because for nearly 12 years, I was that person. My name is Eliza, and the man I built eventually destroyed our marriage. But before we get to that, you need to understand something important. Betrayal like mine doesn't happen overnight. No, my dear. It grows slowly inside trust. I met Daniel on a Tuesday afternoon that smelled faintly of rain and burnt coffee. I was 22 years old and working part-time at a small accounting firm while finishing my graduate degree. Life at that time was simple but exhausting. I had dreams, responsibilities, and more bills than I liked to admit. Daniel walked into the cafe, where I usually studied. He wasn't dressed like someone who had life figured out. His shirt sleeves were rolled unevenly, his hair slightly messy, and he carried a notebook stuffed with loose papers like a man trying to hold his thoughts together. But what caught my attention wasn't his appearance. It was the way he spoke to the barista. Kind, patient, a little awkward. When he sat down 2 tables away from me, I noticed him staring at the same page for nearly 10 minutes without writing anything. Eventually he sighed, then muttered to himself, "None of this is going to work." I should have ignored it. I had my own problems to deal with, but something about the frustration in his voice made me look up. "Bad day?" I asked. He looked surprised someone had heard him. Then he laughed, more like a bad year. That was how it started. Daniel was the kind of man who had big ideas but no clear direction. He wanted to start a business. Then he wanted to write a book. Then he wanted to work in finance. Every week, it seemed like his plans changed. But underneath all that confusion, I could see something else. Potential. He wasn't lazy. He was just lost. And maybe that's what drew me to him. Because even back then, I had a habit of believing in people before they believed in themselves. Our first few months together were messy but exciting. We talked for hours about the future, about the kind of life we wanted, about the things we would build one day. Daniel used to say something that made me smile every time. He'd look at me across the table and say, "You make everything feel possible." At the time, I thought that was romantic. Now I understand what it really meant. Those first few years were not easy. Daniel bounced between jobs. Some months he worked in sales. Other months he tried freelancing. Once he even tried launching a small startup with 2 friends that collapsed in less than 6 months. Through all of it, I stayed. Not just emotionally, financially too. I covered rent more times than I can count. I paid for groceries when he was between jobs. I stayed up late helping him revise business proposals that never went anywhere. My friends sometimes asked why I was doing so much. But love, my dear, makes sacrifice feel noble. Back then, I told myself, we're building something together. And maybe we were, just not in the way I imagined. Now, there is someone else you must understand before this story continues. Clara. Clara had been my best friend since we were 16. We met in high school when she defended me from a group of girls who thought mocking quiet students was entertaining. After that day, we were inseparable. Sleepovers, road trips, shared secrets that felt too embarrassing to tell anyone else. Clara knew everything about me, my fears, my ambitions, my heartbreaks. She was the first person I told when I started dating Daniel. And in the beginning, she liked him. "He's sweet," she said once after meeting him. "A little chaotic, but sweet." That description was accurate. Daniel was chaotic. But somehow our lives slowly started stabilizing. About 5 years into our relationship, something finally changed. Daniel got a job at a mid-size consulting firm. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable. For the first time since I met him, he had a consistent salary. I remember the night he got the offer. He walked into our tiny apartment looking stunned. "They actually hired me?" he said. Then he hugged me so tightly, I nearly dropped the dinner plates I was carrying. That night, we celebrated with cheap wine and takeout noodles. Daniel kept repeating something over and over. "We're finally going to make it." And my dear, for the first time, I believed him. Over the next few years, life improved. Slowly, Daniel worked hard. He learned quickly. His managers liked him. Promotions followed. Our apartment became a bigger apartment. Then eventually a small house. Not a mansion, not luxury, but comfortable. The kind of life we had spent years imagining during those long nights when money was tight and the future uncertain. Clara was around often during those years. She would come for dinner, stay late watching movies. Sometimes she even joked that our house felt like her second home. And honestly, it did. I trusted her completely. Why wouldn't I? She had been part of my life for over a decade. She was practically family. If someone had told me back then that Clara would one day play a role in destroying my marriage, I would have laughed in their face. But success has a strange effect on people. At first, Daniel's confidence was attractive. He spoke with more certainty, walked with more authority. But slowly, that confidence turned into something else. Distance. He started working later hours, taking more business dinners, traveling for meetings that seemed to appear suddenly. At first, I didn't question it. Success demands time. At least, that's what I told myself. Clara still visited often, sometimes even when Daniel wasn't home. We would sit in the kitchen drinking wine and catching up on life. Looking back now, there were moments that should have made me pause. Small things, tiny details. But when you trust people completely, you don't look for hidden meanings. You accept things as they appear. And that, my dear, was my first mistake. The night everything began to change was surprisingly ordinary. It was a Thursday. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Daniel had texted earlier saying he would be home late. Another meeting. Another client dinner. I was sitting in the living room reading when my phone buzzed. It was Clara. A simple message. "Are you home tonight?" Nothing unusual about that, but something about the timing made me pause. I replied, "Yes." "Why?" Her answer came quickly. "Just checking." That was all. Just checking. At the time, I thought nothing of it. But later, much later, I would realize that message meant something very different. Because that night, while I sat alone in the house we had built together, the two people I trusted most in the world were already betraying me. I just didn't know it yet. And when I finally discovered the truth, I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't confront them. Instead, I waited 6 months. And by the time they realized what I knew, their entire world was already collapsing. My dear, people often think betrayal begins with a dramatic moment, a shocking discovery, a confession. But the truth is far more unsettling. Betrayal begins quietly inside the smallest changes. At the time, I didn't realize that Daniel had already started changing. Not dramatically, not in a way that would make alarms go off immediately. No, the changes were subtle, small enough to dismiss, but large enough that once I noticed them, I could never fully ignore them again. Success changes people. Daniel's promotion came during our 8th year together. It wasn't his first promotion, but it was the one that truly shifted his career. His salary nearly doubled. He started managing a small team. And suddenly, our life looked very different. New clients, more networking events, business dinners that stretched late into the night. At first, I was proud of him, proud of us. After all those years of struggle, watching Daniel succeed felt like proof that our sacrifices had meant something. We started going to nicer restaurants, planning vacations we once thought were impossible. Even Clara noticed the difference. One evening she came over for dinner and joked while looking around our living room. "Wow, you two are officially adults now." Daniel laughed. "You say that like we weren't before." She raised an eyebrow. "Oh, please. I remember when your couch was basically collapsing and your fridge contained nothing but yogurt and mustard." We all laughed at that. And in that moment, everything still felt normal, safe. But looking back now, I remember something strange about that evening. Something small, something easy to overlook. Clara and Daniel kept finishing each other's sentences. At the time, I thought it was funny. Now I understand it differently. About 3 months after his promotion, Daniel started coming home later. Not dramatically late, but later than usual. Instead of 6, it became 7, then 8, then sometimes after 9. Each time he had a reasonable explanation. Client meeting, networking dinner, team drinks after work. All things that made sense for someone trying to grow their career. So I didn't question it. In fact, I supported it. Sometimes I even stayed up late waiting so we could talk about his day. He seemed excited, more energetic, more confident, and in many ways I was happy for him. But there was something else too, something I couldn't quite name yet. Distance. The first time I noticed it, I told myself I was imagining things. Daniel had always been careless with his phone. He left it on tables, on the kitchen counter, on the couch. But suddenly, he kept it close, always face down, always within reach. One night we were watching television when a notification buzzed. He picked up the phone quickly, too quickly, and turned the screen away slightly before reading the message. Then he smiled. Not a big smile, just a quick one. But something about it made my chest tighten. "Who's that?" I asked casually. "Work," he said. Then he put the phone back down. Face down again. I didn't push. But the moment stayed in my mind longer than it should have. Around that same time, Clara started visiting more often. Sometimes twice a week. Sometimes 3 times. She said work had been stressful and she liked coming over to relax, which was normal for us. We had always spent a lot of time together. But now something felt slightly different. Not wrong exactly, just different. One evening we were all sitting at the kitchen table after dinner. Daniel had opened a bottle of wine. Clara was telling a story about a coworker who had embarrassed himself during a presentation. Daniel laughed harder than I expected. Clara laughed too. Their eyes met for a second longer than usual. And then they both looked away. The moment lasted maybe 2 seconds. But I noticed it. I didn't understand why it bothered me. So I ignored it. About a week later, something else happened. Something small, but strange. I was at work when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Clara. "Tell her I'll call later." I stared at the message for a moment, confused. Then another message arrived almost immediately. "Sorry, wrong person." I laughed and replied, "Who were you trying to text?" Her response came quickly. "My sister." The explanation made sense. So I didn't think about it again. At least not right away. But later that night, when I was brushing my teeth, the memory popped back into my mind. "Tell her I'll call later." Something about the wording felt odd. But again, I pushed the thought away. Because the truth is, my dear, when trust has been built over many years, the mind resists suspicion. It protects the image of the people you love, even when something inside you whispers that things aren't quite right. The next real moment happened during a dinner that should have been perfectly ordinary. Clara had come over again. Daniel grilled chicken on the patio, while Clara helped me prepare the salad in the kitchen. At one point she asked, casually, "Has Daniel been working late a lot recently?" I nodded. "Yeah, but that's expected now with his new position." She hummed softly. "Must be exhausting for him." Something about the tone felt strange, almost sympathetic, like she understood something I didn't. Later, during dinner, Daniel mentioned an upcoming conference he might attend in another city. Clara asked several questions about it. More questions than I expected. What hotel will they book you at? How long will the trip be? Will your whole team go? Daniel answered easily, but halfway through the conversation, he glanced at her quickly, then at me. Then he changed the subject. Again, the moment was small, but moments like that were starting to accumulate. Tiny cracks forming in the surface of what I believed was a stable life. Over the next few weeks, something inside me slowly shifted. Not suspicion exactly, more like awareness. I started noticing patterns. Daniel's phone lighting up late at night. Clara asking oddly specific questions about his schedule. Both of them occasionally going quiet when I walked into a room. Each moment by itself meant nothing, but together they began forming a shape. And once the mind starts seeing a pattern, it becomes impossible to completely ignore it. Still, I fought the thought, because the alternative was too painful. Daniel was my husband. Clara was my best friend. Two people I trusted with my entire life. The idea that they could betray me like that felt absurd. Unthinkable. Impossible. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. The first time my instinct truly spoke to me happened late one evening. Daniel had fallen asleep on the couch while watching television. His phone was sitting on the coffee table. For a moment, I just looked at it. A strange thought crossed my mind. Pick it up. Check. Just to ease your mind. But I didn't, because doing that would mean admitting something inside me had already started suspecting the worst. So instead, I turned off the television, covered him with a blanket, and went upstairs. But as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, one uncomfortable thought refused to leave. Something was wrong. I couldn't prove it. I couldn't explain it. But somewhere deep inside, I felt the first shadow of doubt. And, my dear, that shadow was about to grow much darker, because soon I would discover something that would confirm my worst fears. And when that moment came, everything in my life would change. My dear, there is a dangerous moment in every betrayal. It's the moment when your intuition stops whispering and starts speaking clearly. And yet, even then, the heart resists. For weeks after that strange feeling began settling in my chest, I tried to convince myself that everything was normal, that I was simply being paranoid, that stress from work and life was making me imagine things that didn't exist. After all, suspicion is an ugly emotion. It poisons trust, and I had spent more than a decade building trust with two people I loved deeply. So I tried to silence the voice inside me. But the problem with intuition is this. Once it wakes up, it rarely goes back to sleep. The first real crack appeared on a Monday evening. Daniel had texted earlier that day saying he would be home late again. A client dinner, he said. By then I had heard that explanation so many times it barely registered anymore. So I made myself dinner, watched a little television, and eventually went upstairs to get ready for bed. Around 10:30, I heard the front door open. Daniel walked in looking tired but unusually cheerful. Long day. I asked. You have no idea, he replied, loosening his tie. He poured himself a glass of water and sat beside me on the couch. For a moment, we talked normally about work, about groceries we needed to buy, about a neighbor who had been complaining about parking again. Everything felt ordinary until his phone buzzed. He glanced down at it quickly. Then, almost immediately, he stood up. I'm going to take a quick shower, he said. The phone stayed on the coffee table. That alone wasn't strange, but something inside me tightened, because usually he took it with him. The screen lit up again, just for a second. I didn't touch it. I didn't move closer, but I did see the name that flashed briefly across the screen. Clara. My stomach dropped. When Daniel returned from the shower, I tried to sound casual. Clara texted earlier. I said. His expression changed for a fraction of a second. It was quick. So quick most people might have missed it. But I didn't. Oh, he said. Yeah, I saw her name pop up on your phone. He nodded. She asked about that restaurant we went to last month. She wants to take someone there. The explanation came smoothly. Too smoothly. Who's she taking? I asked. Daniel shrugged. No idea. He said it so casually that I almost believed him. Almost. But something about the moment stayed with me long after we went to bed. Because it wasn't the text itself that bothered me. It was the reaction, that brief flicker of tension in his eyes before he answered. The kind of reaction people have when they're trying to appear normal. After that night, I began noticing more things. Little details that previously would have slipped past me. Daniel started locking his phone. Not just occasionally. Every time. Clara began mentioning Daniel in conversations when he wasn't around. Small comments like, Daniel must be so busy lately. Or, I can't imagine handling the pressure of his job. They sounded innocent, but sometimes she said them in a way that made it seem like she knew more about his schedule than I did. At first I tried to dismiss it, but the pattern was growing harder to ignore. And the worst part was, I still didn't have proof. Just feelings, observations, moments that felt slightly off. And my dear, feelings alone are a terrible thing to accuse someone with. 2 weeks later, Clara came over again for dinner. By then, I had started watching more carefully, not openly, just quietly observing. Dinner went normally at first. We talked about work, about a new movie everyone seemed to be discussing, about a vacation Daniel, and I had been considering. But halfway through the meal, something happened that made my heart sink. Daniel mentioned he might have another late meeting the next day. Before I could respond, Clara spoke. Oh, right, that strategy meeting you told me about. The room went quiet. For a moment, no one moved. Daniel looked at her. Clara looked at Daniel. Then she laughed quickly. Oh, you mentioned it when we ran into each other at the grocery store last week, she said. Daniel nodded. Yeah, that's right. I smiled, but inside, something cold spread through my chest, because I knew something Clara didn't. We hadn't run into each other at the grocery store last week. I had been with her the entire afternoon that day. That night, after Clara left and Daniel went to bed, I sat alone in the living room. The house was silent, but my mind was loud, very loud. I replayed the moment over and over, her quick explanation, Daniel's nervous nod, the way they both avoided looking directly at me afterward. It could have been nothing, a simple misunderstanding. But the more I thought about it, the less convincing that explanation felt. For the first time, the possibility that had been sitting quietly in the back of my mind stepped fully into the light. What if something was happening between them? The thought made my chest ache, not just because of Daniel, but because of Clara. She had been my friend for more than 15 years. She knew everything about my life, my fears, my dreams, my marriage. The idea that she could betray me like that felt almost impossible to accept. And yet, something deep inside me was starting to believe it might be true. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, my mind replayed moments from the past few months. The texts, the strange glances, the awkward silence during dinner, all those tiny cracks that I had tried so hard to ignore. By morning, I knew something had changed inside me. Not anger, not yet, but clarity. I could no longer pretend everything was fine. I needed to know the truth. And if that truth was as ugly as I feared, then I would deal with it when the time came. But first, I needed answers. Real ones. Because, my dear, suspicions may hurt, but uncertainty hurts even more. And very soon, I was going to discover exactly how painful the truth could be. My dear, there is a moment in every betrayal when the truth finally stops hiding. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly in a way that leaves no room for doubt. For weeks after that dinner with Clara, I lived in a strange state of awareness. Outwardly, nothing had changed. I still went to work, still cooked dinner, still sat beside my husband in the evenings discussing ordinary things like bills, work schedules, and weekend plans. But inside, something fundamental had shifted. I was watching, listening, not accusing, not confronting, just paying attention. Because once suspicion enters your mind, my dear, the world begins to look different. You start noticing things you once ignored. Patterns, pauses, the subtle language of people who believe they are not being observed. And slowly, piece by piece, the truth begins revealing itself. The first undeniable clue came from Clara. It was a Thursday afternoon when she called me unexpectedly. Her voice sounded cheerful, almost overly energetic. "Hey, are you free tomorrow night?" she asked. "I think so," I replied. "Why?" "I was thinking we could have dinner together, just us girls." I hesitated. Clara and I had done that many times before. But something about the timing felt strange. "Sure," I said finally. "Great. I'll pick a place and text you." We hung up, and I went back to work. At the time, I didn't think much of it. But later that evening, something odd happened. Daniel came home unusually early, earlier than he had in weeks. He seemed relaxed, almost relieved. "How was work?" I asked while setting the table. "Good," he said. "Actually, tomorrow night, I have another late meeting." My hands paused briefly. "Really?" "Yeah," he said casually. "Some last-minute client stuff." I nodded slowly. Then I remembered Clara's call. Dinner tomorrow night. Just us girls. A strange feeling settled in my stomach. The next evening, Clara picked me up around 7. She seemed slightly nervous while driving, talking more than usual, asking random questions about work and life. Eventually I asked, "Where are we going?" She named a small restaurant across town, one I had never been to before. It wasn't fancy, just quiet, low lighting, the kind of place people choose for private conversations. We ordered food and wine. For a while the conversation felt normal, but then Clara suddenly checked her phone. Her expression changed, just briefly. Then she locked the screen and placed it face down. I recognized that gesture. Daniel had started doing the same thing recently. The similarity made something inside my chest tighten. Halfway through dinner, Clara excused herself to use the restroom. Her phone remained on the table. I wasn't planning to touch it, not at all. But then it buzzed. The screen lit up, and before I could stop myself, my eyes drifted toward it. Just a glance. That's all. But it was enough. The message preview showed a name. Daniel. And beneath it, the words, "I miss you already." My entire body went cold. For a moment, the restaurant noise faded into the background. Plates clinking, people talking, soft music playing somewhere in the distance. But all I could see were those 3 words. I miss you already. Clara returned a minute later. She sat down smiling, completely unaware of what I had just seen. I studied her face carefully, the familiar features of someone I had trusted for most of my life. Someone who had stood beside me through heartbreaks, celebrations, and every major moment in between. And suddenly I realized something painful. I didn't know her anymore. Or perhaps I had never known her as well as I thought. She picked up her phone casually and glanced at the screen. Then she looked up at me. "Everything okay?" she asked. I smiled. "Yes," I said calmly. "Everything is fine." And that was the moment my marriage ended. Not with an argument, not with tears, but with clarity. Because in that instant, there was no more doubt, no more confusion. The 2 people I trusted most in this world were betraying me. Together. The drive home was quiet. Clara chatted nervously about random things. Work gossip, movies, plans for the weekend. But I barely heard her. My mind was somewhere else entirely, running through memories, moments, conversations that suddenly made sense in a completely different way. By the time she dropped me off at my house, my thoughts had become strangely calm. Not angry, not hysterical, just focused. Daniel was sitting on the couch when I walked in. His laptop open beside him. He looked up and smiled. "How was dinner?" I took off my coat slowly. "It was nice," I said. "Good," he replied. Then he returned to whatever he was doing, completely unaware that everything had changed. I stood there for a moment, watching him. The man I had loved, supported, built a life with. And for the first time since discovering the truth, I asked myself a simple question. What do I do now? Many people would confront them immediately, scream, demand explanations. But something inside me told me that wouldn't be the smartest move. Because once people know they've been discovered, they start hiding their tracks. They become careful, defensive, difficult to catch. And suddenly, my dear, a very different idea began forming in my mind. If Daniel and Clara believed their secret was safe, they would continue making mistakes. They would reveal things without realizing it. And those revelations could become useful, very useful. That night, lying in bed beside Daniel, I made a decision. I would not confront them. Not yet. Instead, I would watch, listen, learn everything I could about their relationship, how long it had been happening, how deep the betrayal really went. And most importantly, I would give them time to feel comfortable, to grow careless, to believe they had fooled me completely. Because when the moment finally came to expose the truth, I wanted it to be undeniable and devastating. So I waited 1 week, then 2, then a month. Eventually, 6 months passed. 6 months of silence. 6 months of pretending nothing was wrong. 6 months of quietly collecting the pieces of a puzzle that would soon destroy both of them. And my dear, when the time finally came to reveal everything, Daniel and Clara would learn a painful lesson. Betrayal may begin quietly, but the consequences, those can be very loud. My dear, the most dangerous kind of revenge is not the one fueled by rage. It is the one built patiently, brick by brick, by someone who has learned the truth and chosen to wait. The morning after I discovered Daniel's message to Clara, I woke up feeling strangely calm. Not peaceful, not healed, but focused. The shock had passed. What remained was clarity. Daniel kissed my forehead before leaving for work like he always did. "See you tonight," He said, "See you?" I replied. He walked out the door, believing everything was normal, believing his secret was still safe. That illusion was exactly what I needed, because from that moment on, I began paying attention in a way I never had before. Not as a wife, but as an observer. It didn't take long to notice the rhythm of their affair. Daniel's late meetings almost always happened on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Clara mysteriously became busy those same evenings. Sometimes she would cancel plans with me last minute. Other times, she simply wouldn't answer her phone. But now that I knew what I was looking for, the pattern was obvious. They weren't even being particularly careful, just confident. Confident that I trusted them too much to ever question their behavior. And for years, they had been right. 3 weeks after my discovery, Daniel made his first mistake. He forgot his laptop at home. Normally, I wouldn't touch his work things. But that morning, curiosity won. I opened it. No password. That alone surprised me. I expected secrecy, hidden folders, locked files. But instead, everything was simply there. Email notifications, calendar events, work messages. And then I saw something interesting. A recurring calendar entry. Every Thursday evening. But it wasn't labeled as a meeting. It was simply marked. See. My chest tightened. Short. Subtle. But obvious once you knew what it meant. Clara. Another month passed before I found something more serious. One afternoon, Daniel asked me to print something from his email while he was at work. While searching through his inbox, a receipt caught my eye. It wasn't from a restaurant or a store. It was from a hotel, a boutique hotel downtown, the kind couples use for romantic weekends. The receipt was from 2 months earlier. Room reservation. 2 guests. My name was nowhere on the booking. Instead, the second guest field had simply been left blank. I stared at the screen for a long time, not crying, not yelling, just absorbing the reality of what had been happening behind my back. Meanwhile, Clara seemed more relaxed than ever. She still visited sometimes, still laughed with me, still asked questions about my life as if nothing had changed. But now that I knew the truth, I noticed the small differences. The way she avoided mentioning Daniel directly, the quick glances she sometimes gave him when she thought I wasn't looking, and occasionally the faintest hint of guilt. Not enough to stop, just enough to show she knew what she was doing was wrong, but apparently not wrong enough to end it. 3 months into my quiet investigation, something happened that changed the way I saw everything. It was a Saturday afternoon. I had gone to the grocery store earlier than usual. While walking through the parking lot, I noticed a familiar car. Daniel's car. At first, I assumed he had simply stopped by to pick something up. But then I saw him. He wasn't alone. Clara stepped out of the passenger seat. They were laughing, talking, looking completely comfortable together. The kind of comfort that only comes from familiarity, from intimacy, from time spent together in ways they had never spent with me lately. For a moment, I stood there frozen, hidden behind another car, watching the 2 people I had trusted most. Clara touched his arm gently while they talked. Daniel smiled at her in a way I hadn't seen in a very long time. And suddenly something inside me shifted. Not heartbreak. That had already happened. Something colder. Something stronger. Understanding. That evening, I sat alone in the living room thinking about everything I had discovered. The messages. The hotel. The secret meetings. The lies. 6 months earlier, the thought of confronting them had filled me with pain. Now, it filled me with strategy, because by then I knew something important. Daniel and Clara believed they were smarter than me. They believed their lies were working. They believed I would never question them. And people who believe they are safe tend to make careless mistakes. So instead of confronting them immediately, I decided to give them exactly what they expected: trust, comfort, normalcy. I smiled at Clara, cooked dinner for Daniel, asked about their days, listened patiently to their stories, all while quietly gathering everything I needed: screenshots, receipts, calendar entries, every small piece of proof. Because when the moment finally came to expose them, I wanted the truth to be undeniable and devastating. By the time the 6th month arrived, I had everything, more than enough to prove the affair, more than enough to destroy the lies they had built. But I still hadn't told them I knew. Not yet, because revenge, my dear, is most powerful when delivered at the perfect moment. And that moment was approaching faster than either of them realized. Daniel's company was hosting a large annual celebration in 2 weeks. A formal event. Colleagues, friends, important people from both our social circles. Clara had already mentioned she would be attending. Of course she would. Why wouldn't she? After all, she was practically part of the family. And suddenly, as I sat there thinking about that upcoming event, a new idea formed in my mind. A beautiful one, a devastating one. Because if Daniel and Clara had been comfortable betraying me in secret, then perhaps it was only fair that the truth be revealed in public. And my dear, they had absolutely no idea what was coming. My dear, there is a difference between revenge and justice. Revenge is emotional, messy, impulsive. But justice requires preparation, timing, and the patience to wait for the moment when the truth can no longer be ignored. By the time Daniel's company celebration approached, I had already spent 6 months quietly gathering everything I needed: messages, receipts, photos, calendar entries, small pieces of evidence that, when placed together, told a very clear story. Daniel and Clara hadn't just made a mistake. They had built an entire secret life behind my back, and now they were about to walk directly into the moment where that secret life would collapse. Daniel's company hosted the event every year, a large formal gathering held at one of the nicest hotels in the city. Executives, employees, spouses, friends, everyone attended. It was part celebration, part networking event, and Daniel had been talking about it for weeks. "This one is important," he told me a few days before the party. "My boss will be there. Some new investors too." I smiled politely. "I'll make sure I look presentable," I joked. He laughed. "You always do." Of course, what Daniel didn't know was that I had been planning this night very carefully, because the guest list included someone very important. Clara. 2 days before the event, Clara called me. Her voice sounded unusually cheerful. "Are you excited for the party?" she asked. "I suppose," I said lightly. "Daniel mentioned it would be big." "Oh, it will be?" she said. "I can't wait to see everyone." Her excitement sounded genuine, almost eager, and I wondered briefly if part of her was excited because she would get to see Daniel there too, without suspicion, without secrecy. After all, public events made their relationship look innocent. Just two people talking, laughing, standing a little too close together. But this time, things would be different. The afternoon of the event, I sat at my desk organizing the evidence I had collected: printed emails, screenshots of messages, the hotel receipt, the calendar entry marked C. Each piece of proof placed neatly inside a thin folder. Simple, clear, impossible to deny. But I wasn't planning to walk around the party handing out evidence like a detective. That would have been dramatic. but ineffective. Instead, I had chosen something far more powerful. A moment, because sometimes the right words spoken in the right place can reveal more than 1,000 documents. That evening, Daniel and I arrived at the hotel together. The ballroom was already filled with people. Soft music, elegant decorations, waiters carrying trays of champagne. Daniel greeted colleagues as we walked inside. I smiled, shook hands, made polite conversation, all while scanning the room. And eventually, I saw her. Clara stood near the bar speaking with a group of people. She looked beautiful, confident, comfortable. When she noticed us, her face lit up. "Hey," she said, walking over. She hugged me first, then Daniel. For a brief moment, the three of us stood there smiling like old friends. If anyone had looked at us from across the room, they would have seen nothing unusual, just a married couple and their close friend. But appearances can be very deceptive. About an hour later, Daniel's boss stepped onto the small stage at the front of the ballroom. He began thanking employees for their hard work throughout the year. People applauded. Glasses clinked. The usual celebration. About an hour later, Daniel's boss stepped onto the small stage at the front of the ballroom. He began thanking employees for their hard work throughout the year. People applauded. Glasses clinked. The usual celebration. As the applause faded, I approached the stage. At first, people assumed I was simply going to congratulate Daniel. Someone even handed me the microphone with a smile. I turned to face the room. Dozens of people watching. Daniel standing nearby. Clara just a few steps away. I took a slow breath. Then I spoke. I'd like to say a few words as Daniel's wife. The room grew quiet. I've always been proud of my husband's dedication to his work. A few people nodded politely. Daniel smiled. But then I continued. However, the past 6 months have taught me something very interesting about dedication. The smile on Daniel's face began to fade slightly. I looked directly at him, then at Clara, and finally back at the audience. You see, I recently discovered that my husband has been spending a lot of time with someone else. The room went silent, completely silent. Daniel's expression changed instantly. Clara froze, and I calmly opened the folder in my hands. Messages. I held up a printed page. Hotel reservations. Another page. Private meetings disguised as work appointments. Another. Gasps began spreading through the room. Daniel stepped toward me. "Stop," he whispered urgently. But I wasn't finished. Because, my dear, after 6 months of silence, I finally had something very important to say. And this time, everyone was going to hear it. My dear, sometimes the most powerful moments in life aren't private. They happen when the world is watching and there's no room left to hide. The room was silent, a silence so heavy it pressed against my ears, against my chest. Daniel's smile was gone. His confident posture crumpled slightly like someone had removed the floor beneath him. Clara's hands trembled as she reached for her clutch. The color had drained from her face. I held the microphone steadily, flipping through the folder. Each page was a carefully arranged piece of the puzzle. Messages, receipts, photos, all linking them together. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, some whispering, some gasping. And I spoke, slowly, deliberately. "My dear friends, colleagues, and everyone gathered here tonight," I began, my voice calm, almost soothing. "I've spent 6 months quietly observing, 6 months quietly collecting evidence of a betrayal I never imagined would touch me so personally." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. "Daniel and Clara, you built a secret world behind my back. Dates disguised as meetings. Messages hidden in plain sight. Trust broken in ways that no one should ever endure." At that moment, the first murmur spread through the room. Some people looked at Daniel and Clara with disbelief. Others leaned in closer, captivated. I could see the panic starting in their eyes. Daniel opened his mouth, but I held up a hand. No interruptions. Please. This is for everyone here to see, not just for me. I began displaying the pages one by one. A hotel receipt. One night, 2 people pretending to attend a conference. A series of messages, affectionate and secret, exchanged at times Daniel had claimed to be working late. Each one drew audible gasps from the audience. Even Daniel's colleagues, who had always admired him, couldn't hide their shock. Clara's friends looked horrified, whispering to each other. I looked at them both, my expression serene, calm. But beneath that calm, there was a storm I had been containing for 6 months. You see, betrayal is a funny thing, I said, pacing slowly in front of the stage. It always seems small at first. A look here, a text there. You convince yourself it's harmless. Until one day, it's not. Until one day, the entire foundation of trust crumbles around you. Daniel's face turned red, then pale, then red again. He tried to reach for my hand, probably to whisper, to beg, to convince me to stop. I stepped back. This is not about shame, Daniel, I said. It's about truth. And the truth cannot be hidden when people's eyes are open and watching. Clara's knees wobbled. She whispered something I couldn't hear. Her world had shrunk into the small space beside me, and the microphone. People began looking at each other. Some pulled out their phones. Others whispered, not knowing how to react. And then, the crescendo of the moment. Daniel's assistant, someone I had quietly spoken to days before, stepped forward. She handed a series of additional documents to me. More receipts, copies of hotel keys, proof of clandestine meetings. The weight of it all pressed down on them. They couldn't escape. They couldn't deny. My dear, there is a lesson here. Revenge isn't about humiliation. It's about clarity. It's about showing someone the consequences of their choices in a way they cannot hide from. And sometimes the most effective lessons are learned in public, because the truth has a voice louder than lies ever could. By the end of the evening, Daniel and Clara were nearly speechless. Some people tried to console Daniel, but he waved them off. Clara's face was streaked with tears, and she barely met anyone's eyes. I folded the folder neatly and set it aside. No yelling, no screaming, no chaos, just quiet, undeniable truth. The audience absorbed the weight of what had happened, and in that quiet, the real power of patience and preparation became clear. Because, my dear, 6 months of careful observation, patience, and planning had turned what could have been private heartbreak into a moment that would be remembered by everyone in that room. My dear, the storm doesn't end when the rain stops. It's what comes after that teaches you who you are and what you're made of. The day after the public revelation, silence dominated my home. Not the quiet that brings peace, but the quiet heavy with tension and expectation. Daniel hadn't come home. Clara didn't dare answer my calls. Their absence spoke louder than any apology could. My dear, some stories don't shout. They tap you on the shoulder and whisper truth. The house was quiet now. Too quiet. Not the kind of quiet that brings peace, but the heavy, expectant kind. The kind that presses against your chest, reminding you that nothing will ever be the same again. 6 months of watching. 6 months of planning. 6 months of quietly observing every word, every glance, every careless assumption that my husband and my so-called best friend made, thinking I was unaware. And now, the moment had arrived. I didn't rush it. Justice, the kind that stings and lingers, doesn't need drama. It doesn't need shouts or smashed plates. No, it works quietly, deliberately, like a slow dawn spilling light over a dark city. Every move was measured, every word carefully placed. They weren't ready for it. When Daniel looked at me, he expected confusion, maybe tears, perhaps even an apology. Instead, he found nothing but calm. Calm isn't weakness, my dear. Calm is the sharp edge of clarity. And Clara, my former best friend, she saw it too. The quiet fury behind my eyes, the truth she had thought she could escape. That single moment held years of betrayal, years of patience, years of sacrifice, all condensed into the unwavering gaze of someone who had been underestimated for far too long. For 6 months, I had carried the sting of betrayal like a hidden weight, letting it sit beneath the surface, shaping every thought, every plan. And in the end, that weight became my weapon, not loud, not destructive, but precise, undeniable. They didn't need to hear me shout. They didn't need to see me crumble. They saw everything in my stillness, my quiet determination, and the way I carried myself. Because sometimes, my dear, the most powerful revenge is quiet. The aftermath wasn't immediate chaos. It was subtler than that. Colleagues whispered. Friends watched, unsure of whether to admire or fear what they had witnessed. And in the small victories, Daniel facing the truth before his closest friends, Clara realizing that some trust, once broken, can never fully return, I found something unexpected: freedom. Freedom isn't loud. It isn't a celebration or an announcement. It's the soft satisfaction of walking through your house, sipping your morning coffee, reading a book, knowing that for once, everything belongs to you. Everything you built, everything you sacrificed, everything you thought you had lost, you have it back. I realized then that life doesn't just happen. It unfolds in whispers, in quiet realizations, in the careful navigation of truth. And betrayal, even when it hits like a thunderclap, can become the moment you discover your own strength. I sat with Winston at my feet, watching the city lights flicker through the windows, and I whispered to myself, "You weren't weak, Maggie. You were patient. You were deliberate. And now you are free." Because I was. Truly, completely free. And, my dear, freedom feels heavier than revenge sometimes because it carries clarity, dignity, and the knowledge that you are no longer defined by someone else's choices. My dear, if you stayed until the end, then you understand something most people never realize until months, sometimes years later. Not every revelation is an end. Some betrayals are shields. Some betrayals are the moment you finally stop being someone else's plan. I built a life. I built him. I gave years to trust, to love, to family. And when that trust was shattered by the person I believed would never hurt me, I discovered my own power in ways I never imagined. Before you go, sit with this. If the people you love and trust betrayed you for their convenience, would you crumble or would you rise and take back what is yours? Can loyalty survive when it was quietly weaponized against you? And have you ever realized your own strength only after someone assumed you had none? Think on these, my dear. Tell me what you would do. I read every word. And if you want more stories where justice isn't shouted, but felt in every quiet victory, subscribe. Your next story is already waiting.